Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Radically Loved. I am joined by a very special guest. We're in human form. This is my first in-human interview since January 2020. Yeah, we have Wade Lightheart here, and he's been on the show. He was on the show recently, actually, but we had such great feedback that we needed to do another one, and any advantage that I get to see somebody in person, I'm going to take. So thank you so much for allowing us to record. We're at the Bioptimizer's Bio Home.
Yeah, we call it the Bio Home. Yeah.
Bio Home. Mm-hmm. It's so, it's awesome.
Thank you.
Is this open to only certain people, or what is?
We hope to be doing events here, but we do bring in special guests like yourself for, different reasons.
For different reasons.
We have a pool table here.
Yeah.
We've got training on the roof. We've got some biohacking stuff. We got the video presentation center.
Yeah.
We got a chef place over there. We do all kinds of fun stuff here, and it's only starting. And we're getting more and more and more. So
I'm excited. There was a long list of questions that I didn't get to ask you the last time we chatted, and you and I have the same, I would say, spiritual lineage.
Yes.
And one of the things that I wanted to ask you that I didn't get to ask you the last time was, how did you get on the path? Like, what led you to your spiritual practice? Like, how did you end up learning about Paramahansa Yogananda?
Sure. I would say it was a series of miracles. Largely in part, I think Yogananda really had to kick me in the head a few times for me to actually get it. There was a couple of events that happened. So when I was 22, I had a near-death experience. And from that, I got really clear that I don't have to operate from faith. There is a God, and when brought forth the presence of divinity, you judge yourself. You're not judged within by the external source. The presence of the divine light of eternity, of ever-loving foreverness, which is both brilliant and gentle. When you're faced with that and you do the life review, the experience I had was self-loathing. I had experienced my the life review, through all the pain I had caused other people through my ignorance. And the result was, that's not good. And from that, I went through a series of past lives. And I'm 22 years old. I've got no experience with reincarnation or past lives or any of this stuff. I had stepped away from organized religion. And this was a very transcendent experience. And then I went through a process of coming back, and was totally blown away as a fourth-year university student, which then seemed like kindergarten. So that really started my path into a deeper exploration of self, and then that would be in 1994. And in 96, I was working in a place called Canadian Sun Vitamins, and it was in North Vancouver. There was a little mall there, and I worked in this little section of a store that they had a supplement store within a big store within the Bay, which is a big chain in Canada. And this wonderful lady who I worked with gave me a book called Autobiography of Yogi, Yogananda's famous book, one of the top 100 spiritual books of all time, which was really the first glimpse at what Eastern philosophy was like to the West. He came here in 1920 and really was the father of the yoga movement and all of what we have today. And I remember reading the first part of that book, and I'm like, wow, I'm kind of lost here. It's kind of boring. It's kind of slow. I'm not quite sure what's happening. But he was going to see a bunch of different saints. And one of the saints that he saw in this book was called the Tiger Swami. And the Tiger Swami was this super muscular yogi guy that was like punching out bricks in the wall and wrestling tigers with his bare hand into submission. I was like, hey man, maybe there's something to this yoga stuff. I was like, you need to get this. I at that time being a young strapping buck and wanting to get bigger and stronger and all these things. I was like, wow, this is cool. So I read that, and the beauty of that is it resolved my issues with organized religion. So that was, but for some reason, maybe the meditation piece had fallen out of the book or something. I don't know. I didn't get the process that I could engage in a practice that they offered. And life had a different turn of events. Of course, I went on to my early competitive career, which I then resolved when I saw that bodybuilding was essentially a drug cult in 1998. And then I left that, started my own practice at a nutrition store and personal training stuff in Vancouver. And after a year of working like a maniac, I kind of fell in with the wrong crowd and discovered underground, dance parties and the whole drug scene that went along with that, and had an absolute raucous time that was totally X-rated and fun and crazy, but led me to a very dark place, as it tends to do. And ended up with, and I won't get into all the details, but there was a series of events that happened in a couple of weeks that would radically, my house was broken into. I was supposed to take his job with an executive place in an international kind of industry. That person got arrested by the FBI because they were this sort of thing. I didn't know that because they were like, and then a whole crazy bunch of things happened, and these two people came into my life. They were a brother and sister who were kind of in this underground scene, and I had never met the brother, and the brother gave me these 3 books on yoga, and 2 of them I can remember very clearly. One was Common Sense About Yoga and Raja Yoga by Swami Vivekananda. And during that time, I had been experimenting with meditation and using Baroque music to get into to frequency states. And then that was from a book called Super Learning. And then I realized, well, if I overlaid the beats and sped up the beats and concorded that with different types of drug usage, I could, stay up for an extended period of times. I could learn at a high speed. And I started to have all these kind of alternative experiences, and it was working, but there was some problems with that. And the interesting thing is, I came back home because I landed in the hospital. I've been in a really bad state. I've been overdosed and had another drug issue and all this sort of stuff. And then I had to escape this world that I'd encased myself in.
Yeah.
And the criminal associations and all of that stuff, and got out of it. And was reading these books at home. I went back to New Brunswick where my parents was. I was in Vancouver, Canada at the time, and I read these books. And inside one of the books, Common Sense About Yoga, it said, if you engage in a meditative practice and use, various types of drugs or things that alter your states or sounds without the guidance of a realized master, you're going to be a physical and mental wreck. And I was like, perfect. I figured out what happened to me because I was a physical and mental wreck.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need a teacher. Okay. Well, I heard that when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. So I said, with all my heart and all my mind, I'm ready for my teacher to come to me. And that night, Yogananda appeared in my room. And I mean, I'm not talking like I had a vision or a dream. I'm talking was in my room. And a silent transmission came from him, is that you need to do Kriya Yoga. And so the next day I got up and got on the computer, and up came this picture of Yogananda, and it said there was this self-realization fellowship in Vancouver, which I was going to go back to. And I was like, okay, well, I got a hold of that and called them up on the telephone, and I'm like, hey, I want to do this Kriya Yoga. How much does it cost? Who's teaching it? And they're like, no, that kind of work like that. You can apply for these lessons, and then after a year or so, you can engage in the practice. If you get so inclined, you can do Kriya. I'm like, oh, cool, I'm in. So I got these. I moved back to Vancouver because I had a couple-month period to kind of straighten my life out. And I went back and I had to extricate myself from that world. So there were some dangerous consequences that were not easy to get out of. It involved, driving the back of a Lincoln Navigator with bad people with guns to your head and stuff like that. So a series of events, but somehow I got out of that and left that world and started my practice. I remember when I first got my lessons, I was like, oh my, wow. Like, it was just like, yes, somebody knows what I've been thinking. And a month or two later, I ended up going to a meditation center because it said it'd be helpful to go around and be around other people. And I went there and cultivated some relationships and some practices. And The funny part about it was I hadn't fully extricated myself from my party lifestyle, so I used to go out partying, and I had this like, I was just the quintessential, bad-looking muscle dude, and I'd be coming in with a variety of nefarious characters, like flying on MDMA into the yoga center on Sundays, going like, "Man, you got to get into this meditation, like when what's this awesome?" So I was the baddest yogi you could ever imagine, but there was something within that essence that was really helpful for me, and I found solace in it, and eventually or most of the things, and we're still working on things, it's always a work in process, have dropped away since then.
We had a conversation about my colorful past as well, but one of the things that I find fascinating was here you have all the tools, right? You have all the information ready and it keeps presenting itself, but still the time that it takes for you to actually be able to integrate. Even though you had a very visceral experience with seeing somebody say, "Hey, this is what you need to do." How long did it take for you to get to that point, to actually feeling like, okay, all the nefarious characters have dropped off and now I can actually focus on?
Well, I don't think the nefarious characters ever drop away. I'm not so sure that you actually resolve those things. I think you learn how to manage those things. So to me, self-realization is recognizing I'm that guy. I'm the wild man dancing on a pool table with a bunch of crazy people whacked out of my head to some dance tracks and flipping out and having a great time. And I'm also the fella sitting on a rock in Sedona, Arizona by myself, meditating for hours. I'm both of them. And so I think a lot of people have a vision of you're supposed to be this serene, meditative character that is, Zen all the time. And I do aspire to be that way. But if you look at Yogananda, the person, and I always used to have, this was my issue, like, you'd go to the thing and everyone's like, they're talking these quiet, soft overtones, right? And they're like, to demonstrate the peace that they're at. But when I'm listening to Yogananda, he says, when I'm hearing his speech, and you'll stand amidst the crash of breaking worlds and remain unshaken. Like, this guy is like intense. Fired up. Yeah. He's intense. He's got the fire in his eyes. And he says, one of the things that he said is, listen, if you're going to be a villain, be the greatest villain that you can be. Life is just a movie. This is a pictures. It's all shadows and light. And that's not saying go out and be a nefarious character. What it's saying is there's a nefarious character within all of us. And to be an acceptance and recognition of that, and recognize that that's innately part of me and will never drop away. It's just, am I feeding it or not? And the deeper I go into my spiritual internal realm, the less frequent that character comes out, but when it comes out, it's more in a wholesome way as opposed to an unwholesome way, right?
Give us an example.
A couple of weeks ago, over here we got a pool table. So a friend of mine, he's a great guy, Keith. He got a pool table at his house. And I used to play pool. I was kind of one of those kids that skipped school and we played pool. It was kind of a cool thing when I was a young guy. And I was pretty good at it. And then it kind of faded away for years. And, it was fun. And he got a pool table. And so I would go down to visit him. And we started playing pool. And one of the things that emerged out of this, for whatever reason, spontaneously, is I started doing this commentation, like a commentator, like a football commentator. Yeah. Only I was making the comparison that I was playing football while I'm shooting pool, and I'm doing this narrative. And it became quite funny. And he's a comedian, and he's a business guy, and he's one of the most fun, likable people of all time. And that emerged, and then a bunch of us gets involved. And we're all playing, and then it turns into this whole crazy show. And then the next guy, Garrett, he's a big internet stuff, he gets a pool table. And so now we have a league. And we get jerseys, and we have titles, and, you know, like I'm Thunderfelt from the Venice Beach Vikings, and this guy is, you know, so, and then we're trash talking each other on the table, and we're having so much fun. And then the other day, for whatever reason, because we get the karaoke machine out, and we're singing karaoke as well. So we're playing pool, doing commentary, singing karaoke, and Garrett starts rapping to this cool beat, and I'm on fire that day on the table, and so I'm working the table like I'm pandering. I'm imagining I'm pandering to 80,000 people, and then I start breakout dancing, and he's rapping, and I'm dancing, and it's somehow in the middle of the pool table. So it was very not unlike my wild, crazy self of 20 years ago, but it just spontaneously emerged in the moment.
Right. And it's such an immersive, natural, joyous, pure state. That's what you're saying, right? You're
I have no control of it. It just kind of comes out, and I witness it. And I don't, where maybe there was a time in my meditative yogic practice, and I think this happens for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They think somehow that they have to tone down their wild side.
Yeah.
As opposed to express the wildness of oneself in a wholesome way. Right? Because not being wild, I think, is kind of boring and flat, and makes some people who might live a more raucous kind of lifestyle say, hey, that's not it. And there was a great scene, I think, in Awake. There was a famous actor that came to see Yogananda.
I love that film.
Yeah, and he said, Yogananda says, so let me get this straight. I can come here and I can still drink. He's like, yes. I can still smoke. Yes. I can still date around with all these girls that I like. Absolutely. He goes, well, this sounds like, hey, I'm into this. He goes, but you may find that if you do this for a long, those things will fall away on their own. And of course, now he's 50 years later, and those things have fallen away from that person. But yoga wasn't a way of restriction. Mm-hmm. It was a pathway where the negative or the tamas aspects of oneself start to drop away on their own. Not that you're trying to hold them at bay, but that through the inspiration of divinity that they burn away.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, everything. I love everything that you're saying, because that was one of the big draws for me as well, and why that made sense to me was because I didn't feel that restrictive life. It didn't feel that way. It felt like yoga was way more encompassing and more accepting than any other path that I had looked into or did research on. This whole idea that we have to be a certain way or behave a certain way. Right. And I find that fascinating, especially when I first started to teach, because there's a certain level of carrying yourself. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying for people like you or me, I feel like we thrive more in being in the experience of life, as opposed to shying away from those, I like you call it raucous moments.
Yeah.
Like that energy that we have that is part of the vibrancy of life. That I love karaoke, by the way. That's one of my favorite pastimes, and I love that you do that, because in a sense everything is yoga, right? Everything is part of union. Yeah, it's exactly what it is. So what is for you in that? There's so much that you said that I want to go back to, because you have so many great stories and so many great experiences. I've had other friends that have had near-death experiences as well, and for some of them, it wrecked them in a very difficult
tough.
way.
It can be the integration after is not easy.
That's exactly what I want to talk to you about. I want to tell us about what that integration was like.
Yeah. I'll finish one piece on the last one because I think it's worth saying. So after doing my meditation practice and finding some struggles in some of the restrictive components of yoga, I discovered the teachings of David Hawkins, and I would go and meet with him. We'd go to his events, and I got all his videos and the books, and they're absolutely the most thorough component of the human condition. He wrote the map of consciousness and all this. And I struggled with this idea of sainthood. Like, so in the West, we celebrate sainthood. In the East, they celebrate Buddhahood or enlightenment. And we were at this event with Dr. Hawkins, and he was talking about this, right? The sainthood versus enlightenment, and where Jesus taught just to save you from the lower aspects of, the worst aspects of the human condition, and maybe get to a place of unconditional love where enlightenment is in peace and beyond. And he talked about Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was smoking cigarettes in his biddy shop, but he was fully enlightened. Then he would wander off from the shop, and they'd have to go get him and all this sort of stuff. And he said, sainthood is the perfection of the personality. Enlightenment is transcendent of. And it was the biggest relief in my life, because I realized sainthood was probably not in the cards for me. I was like, I'm really trying to be a good yogi, but I don't think I'm doing a great job, right? I'm still swearing, I'm still not eating the right things part of the times, right? I have bad thoughts or whatever. I probably have sex too much, all this sort of things. I was like, God, how am I ever going to get to sainthood? It's just, and then when that came in, I was like, well, maybe I can just bypass sainthood and become enlightened and just let the body and its personality and my ego do whatever it is, because I'm not in charge of that anyways. It's just happening on its own. So, yeah, so that's that. Now, to go back to your further question about, yes, near-death experiences what I've had, and I had two other incidences, and one not so long ago, which was the ultimate death experience, which is death not just of the physical body, but death of the ego itself. What Hawkins writes about in his book is The Final Door. And when he talks about death wasn't that terrible, first and foremost. So people who are worried about it, there was certainly the first time that I experienced that, there was a resistance to it. And some fear, obviously, that came up for it, especially because it was that happened when I was 22, and I'm like, that's too young. That's the time when my sister had died at 22, and I'm like, oh man, I died at 22 in another lifetime, that in my lifetime review, and I was like, oh, it's kind of like a point that I got to transcend, which I did. I don't know how. Divine grace. And then there's the other times through plant medicine, going into that death experience and then emerging into the light, which was absolutely super beautiful, like almost a melting sensation. And then the death of the ego, or the final door, which you go in, which is to actually lay one's life, what you think is your life, down for God. To walk into the bullets. And you see who goes through that moment, Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Jesus and others that kind of lay a permanent track there. But what we think is our life is actually a derivative of the one life, the one thing. And when one comes fully aware that you haven't laid down the idea of separation, because separation is what gives you what you call your life and what I call my life. That's terrifying. And I mean, it's really terrifying. It's terrifying on a level that I don't think most people can appreciate. Because the soul has a kind of a recollection of going through death that I think makes the moment a little easier to accept when one's in it than we might imagine. But the big death, what I would call, where you recognize that, oh yeah, I haven't really laid down this idea that there's a me and there's a God. That one's that one we're still unpacking. That one we're still unpacking. And I'm still here, so I didn't completely go through the final door.
Right.
And I don't profess I'm enlightened or anything like that. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying I've just had these unusual experiences that allow me to not operate on the aspect of faith. These are experiential realities, like going to the store or lifting weights or smelling a rose. So I've been given the good fortune of not having to operate on faith. But the integration part after, in all cases, and I think people that go down the plant medicine route or people that have near-death experiences, these are different forms of death. And Jordan Peterson talks about this. every time that you go further into the truth, there's a part of you that has to die. And that's very uncomfortable. Your own ignorance has to die. Your own aspects of character flaws or character assets that don't serve you anymore has to die. And that dying is something, as we talked about in the West, which we're not as so comfortable with. And yet that's also what opens us up to something far greater than our own life and experience. But coming back from that, it can be very discombobulating. Many saints I know, they take years of integration when they go through it. They take on different names. They leave careers, family. Like it's extremely disruptive, and it's important to know about it beforehand. If you're really going for God, if you're really going for divinity, then you better tell the people around you that, because it can come upon you and descend on you at any moment. And usually you're unprepared for it.
Right. How do you prepare for it? I mean, as many people think that they do. I mean, a lot of these Eastern practices are to prepare for death.
Yes. Yeah, because death is what enlightenment is. Death of what you think you are into that which has always been. And I think a lot of people don't see death as death is something that's an avoidable thing. And that doesn't mean you go run towards it, but it's something that you have to transcend. And the physical body, and the aspect of the ego, its fundamental aspects is, is to acquire stimulation.
Yeah.
We have our sensory organs so that we can get food to support the system to stay alive, and we have this desire to procreate so that we can create an extension of our protoplasmic self into other ones, right? And then there's the defense mechanism to ward off other attackers who may be trying to consume us. Those are the three things: the feeding, fighting, and fornication aspects of the ego, which all other aspects emerge from those things, which is the protoplasm's desire to live, to continue to live, and to replicate itself.
Right. Sounds like the Matrix.
Yeah.
Well,
we are kind of living in the Matrix, right?
We are.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this the last time. Maybe I'll try to remember. No, we totally are. And one thing that you said, I just want to go back to what you said because it was very poignant. You said that you have the good fortune of not having to rely on faith. Mm-hmm. So there is this knowing that you have. How does that help you navigate living on this plane, navigating daily life?
Yeah, great question. I think it puts things in perspective. I've been, having nothing and homeless and in the world as a vagabond, lived in the most beautiful places at the top of the food chain, as they'd say, living in your penthouse overlooking the city, every kind of thing that you could possibly want, relationships, money, clothes, cars, titles, all those things. Now I just find them mildly amusing. You're cool. Awesome. It's kind of like passing by on a movie. And they're both enjoyable, and they're also, there's hooks within them that you have to be mindful of. And I'm no different than anybody else. It's easy to get hooked in that, right? It's easy to get ensnared by the sensory. I never used to understand that when Yogananda would talk about the ensnarement of the sensory experiences. And one of his music says, desire, my old enemy, has surrounded me, and he's giving me lots of trouble. What's that being about? What is this desire? What's wrong with having a piece of cake, or what's happening? What is that? But what I realized, it wasn't the actual moment of what you're trying to acquire. It is the feeling of lack, that not having it is where you're enslaved by those sensory experiences, right? I need, like you talked about this, I need this, or I must have that, or I've got to have this, or why hasn't this happened? And that's when your senses are using to enslave you, as opposed to senses being something that you can enjoy and experience. And so, can you walk away from the best meal ever in the middle of it and not feel a sense of loss? Can you be making love with your partner and be able to stop in a second and not feel a sense of love? Can you ultimately get to the end of your life and not feel a sense of loss? Well, that's yoga.
Yeah. Oh, so good. I've never had anybody explain it that well in that very practical way, because I mean, it's hard. That's why, I mean, it's called a practice, because you have to continually remember, you have to continually do that. What is your process of recognizing those ensnarements within yourself? Like, in your mind, what is the process that happens? Do you recognize it when you're in that domino, or when you're in that process of, oh, here I go, I'm getting trapped by this?
Oh, sometimes, yes. But the really good ones are very subtle. The very good ones hook you in and can take you years before you escape out of them. And there's a concept in yoga called samsaras, which is or samskaras, some people call it, which is the karmic seeds that lie within one consciousness. So we kind of think, we have this model of the world that if you're doing a yoga practice, that you are continually moving into this state of beatific bliss, and the New Ages kind of thing is, I'm going to be rich and famous and happy and loved and joyful, and all this poetic musical BS. When if you study the lives of saints, I mean, the lives are oftentimes chaotic and tragic and horrific, and you're going, wait a second, well, where's all this rainbows and unicorns? It looks like death, destruction, pain, suffering, enslavement. Like, oh, how can that be? Because with these karmic seeds that may need to be undone or unrealized or realized, as you go up the chain, sometimes your biggest challenge is you couldn't handle it at this level of awareness. Now you're ready to handle the big boys. So here it comes. Here comes the big boy to really test you. And I think when you start to get into the more advanced states, if you look at Patanjali's yogas, the siddhis, for example, the supernatural powers that come.
After you've...
Well, if you actually read the text, those are hooks. Those are obstacles. They're,
To move through the cities.
yeah, those are obstacles to enlightenment, not acquisition.
Right.
So what's interesting in the New Age world, it's a direction to the seeming acquiring of these siddhic powers of acquisition, of claiming, of
Intuition,
clairvoyance,
being
and
able to see,
right.
yep.
But those are the subtler hooks in the spiritual realms, because like, oh, I'm so enlightened, I send a message and my friend calls me. I do this and I'm a manifester. That's a great one. I'm a manifester. Wow. Okay. Yeah. These are very, very subtle and powerful hooks that I think really trip up you and can send you tumbling into the chaos of that, because cities tend to come and go for most people, and you'll have them for periods, and then if you seek the desire of them. So that's that thing. Second thing, spiritual company. So as I see myself getting entrapped in something, or I come to these inevitable juxtapositions you do on the yoga path, you need people who honor and can recognize that will give you honest feedback, that you can have full transparency with them. And that's a beautiful thing, that you can have someone that can slap you upside the head when you're off, and can celebrate when you transcend it, or just to be a friend when you're going through some of the darkest parts, the dark night of the soul, which is a part of it. And that's when you do feel abandoned by divinity, and you lose faith and even certainty. And we all go through those things. That's part of the process, to go through the separation from divinity after your practice and continue to do your practice without looking for an outcome. And I was speaking with one of the more advanced monks one time. He says, there's about 14 years there where it was really flat. And, this is a person that goes into a breathless state of will. And, I'm thinking, well, that guy went through that. What's coming for me?
When was the last time you went through a dark night of the soul?
It seems like every other month. I really had a few months back. I had one of those really super transcendent experiences, and
so you were talking about the most recent experience of your dark night of the soul.
well, that was having that experience of the complete dissolution of the ego.
Yeah.
And then coming back and having the sense that almost continuously that I'm going to leave my body at any second. And psychically, that was very difficult to deal with.
How do you deal when you're having those moments? Is there something that you do, something that you can do in those moments that brings you back to your body, or do you distract? Like, what happens in those moments?
For me, because I would say that I'm not ready to make that step, and I feel there's much more for me to do in the world. But I remember, when you read Autobiography of Yogi, that's written on several levels, and all great texts are. And there's what's going on, kind of like on the report, but each one of those is an illustrative story that for me comes to life when I'm in one of these transcendent experiences, and that's the beauty of that book. And then there's a third piece with it, which is the subtle activities of that which you should engage in should these things come up. And in Yogananda's life, particularly as he got on, he would fight with, as he said, I would fight with Divine Mother to give me more time so that I could continue on with my work and my writings. And he would enter into the samadhi experience, and that's it, he'd leave the body. And what he invited the chelas, his devotees, to do is to whisper in his ear that I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And that the devotion of his chelas to him would bring his soul back to the body, because that was the only thing that was inviting, was his mission and service to the world as Yogananda the person, as opposed to Yogananda the spark of the infinite divine. And for me, I use that love for the mission of Bioptimizers, which is to end physical suffering and activate biologically optimized health. I had a thought of my future children, which I really want to experience, and so my love for them, even though they're not incarnated yet, was those things that I use to continue to stay here and help stabilize that energy.
I was just gonna. You went in with your psychic powers, and you read that was my next question: is how do you inform what you're doing now? How does that spiritual practice inform what you're doing now? And obviously, it's helped you create. This is your purpose. It's your dharma. It's what you're doing now. It's that fulfillment of expanding this mission, the same mission. And I always find it so fascinating when I meet other yogis that are able to fully immerse themselves in the human experience and allow all of those facets of who we are and accept it all and thrive and live and be able to go through all of the motions of suffering and pain and loss and failure and all of the things, and still be able to show up and say, okay, I can do this, I can continue to do this, or I choose to do this. So I said this the last time we had a conversation. I said, this is one of many conversations, because I still feel like there's so much that I want to ask you, but I'm going to ask you just one final question. And this is actually something I wanted to ask you last time. You mentioned that you want to be a father, mm-hmm. that you're you want to be a father and your children are not here yet, you haven't met them yet, or maybe you have, and you're just waiting for them to come to this planet. What is your biggest hope for them? What if you can instill one lesson from your life that you've experienced onto them that will stay with them for the rest of their lives? They can have their dad tell them one thing in their ear for the rest of their lives. What would you want that to be?
It's always hard to say, because I think with not being a parent, there's a certain naivete that's being projected onto it. So I wouldn't be so bold to claim that I know exactly what that would be. But if I would guess, and that's the best I can do at this stage, that would be to cultivate a life of engaged non-attachment. And what that means for me is to be fully engaged in that which you are doing, 100%, whatever that is, without deviation and with certainty, for however long it is, 2 minutes or 20 years or your whole life. And when it comes the moment to let go of it, you let go of it without any sense of loss. And if I could get that for my children, then I would bring this incarnation to a full success.
Wow. I love that. I'm like, okay, now I'm really going to ask you the final question. I'm going to keep saying final question.
It's like a weird sort of Jeopardy, right?
I know. All right, now for real. No, I'm just so grateful for you, and just you. The conversations that I've had with you have left such an impression on me, and I really feel like you are a walking and living example of what it means to be a yogi in the real world, and I just so appreciate that. And it just, to be in your presence has been such a gift, and I'm so grateful that you are here in the flesh, that you stayed here, that you're here.
Great to be here too, as long as it allows.
And yeah, I'm just so grateful to know people like you. It really is inspiring. Before I ask you the final question for real this time, where can people go for more information?
Oh, right, yeah, they go to byoptimizers.com and they can learn all about my health stuff. We have an awesome health course, which is the 12-week, 84-day course where we kind of express ourselves and physically, that discipline we talked about, and why that's important. So all the things that I learned condensed into a very easy component. That's Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. My team handles all that stuff.
Yes, and for our listeners, actually Bioptimizers, and Wade's been a huge supporter of our show, so you can go to bioptimizers.com and enter the code RadicallyLive10 and get all of the products, especially Magnesium Breakthrough. It's my favorite. I truly, I mean, it really is something so inspiring to see when people are actually they practice what they preach, and I can't say it enough that you definitely are that person. So the final question, I'm curious if your answer is going to be different from when I asked you the first time.
Sure.
Is you know, we talked all about radical love when I was on your podcast, and the whole idea of why I started Radically Loved was to build a space for people to go to get inspired or to feel supported, that the universe works for them and not against them. So final question to you is, how do you feel radically loved?
Well, the fact that we're here, existence itself. If you look, we're floating on a little piece of dirt, some inconspicuous part of the universe, traveling at some extraordinary speed, and in this giant vacuum. And these are all what we can determine with our sensory experiences. The quantum world says there's infinite other worlds and possibilities and dimensions to this. The fact that somehow we have cultivated this thing called consciousness. We have this physical body, and we have existence itself. So whatever it is that started this whole scenario has created you, and has created you, the listener, or the viewer, or whatever that, like. So your existence is proof that you're radically loved, because only love could possibly create something so magnificent and so unusual and so unique that must cultivate from a position of such super intense, infinite, unconceivable level of consciousness, love, divinity, whatever you want to call it, the knowable, the unknowable known, that your existence is proof of that. And what more could you ask for?
That's amazing. That is very similar to your first response, so I love that. We'll have to link it here so that people can hear your other response. They're almost identical. Thank you so much for doing this, and just for being awesome, and for all of your wisdom and your love, the radical love that you put into everything you do. We get to enjoy it, so thank you so much.
Well, hey, thank you for me. And I'm always careful with all those accolades because you haven't seen me in my grumpy self.
Same. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Wade. You're the best. Thank you.